attempting to engage young adults has churches, ministry groups, and even parents busy researching, swapping ideas, and trying to keep up with cultural trends. About the time we think we found out what might resonate with the next gen age group, something or everything changes. In this Tab Media special report, Daniel Blackaby, grandson of Experiencing God author Henry Blackaby, joins us to share about his work in this area as editor-in-chief of The Collision. Welcome, Daniel.
Hey, welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us to talk about this ever-changing topic. And
there's never a shortage of things to talk about in this area.
Right. Okay, to get us started, I'm going to jump on thecollision.org to read what you say The Collision is. Okay. The Collision was launched in 2019 as a ministry of Blackaby Ministries International with the goal of equipping and challenging Christians to collide with their culture for Christ. By using written articles, video, social media, podcasts, live streams, public speaking events, and published resources, the ministry strives to help Christians see where God is at work in today's culture and join him. All right. So as an Experiencing God groupie myself, I recognize the find God and see where he is at work and join him. So that phrase jumped out at me, which ties you back to Blackaby Ministries International, I think.
Yeah, very much. Very much the Collision is born out of this sort of that kind of understand that framework of God inviting you to join him, that God is at work, even in places sometimes that maybe we don't see him unless we're looking. And although obviously sort of the area that God is, I feel God's called me in our Collision ministry is different than where I think he called my grandfather or God called my father. Very much built on that same God, same way he relates to us, same way he calls us, and just how he has a unique purpose and kind of calling for each one of us.
All right. And you mentioned your father, who is Richard Blackaby, so also co-author of Experiencing God. What's it been like to be in the Blackaby family, to be grandson of Henry, son of Richard? And I know there's many other in the Blackaby family that have their own ministries and have charted their own ways. What's it been like? And how's it influenced your faith journey?
Yes, well, it's one of those things that people always ask, and obviously my grandfather has just had such a tremendous impact on so many people, and but for me, really, that's all I've ever known is that family, that kind of way of looking at God, and really just that kind of the experience of from as far back as I can remember, literally everywhere I've ever gone around the world, and in every setting I've been in, and sort of like the most unexpected places, even like airports or just all over the place. Having people that will recognize the name and be, hey, are you related to Henry? That Experiencing God just changed my life, and I quit this and did this, or I started this, or I overcame this because of what your grandfather taught. And it's one of those things that you just don't get tired of hearing. And I think just sort of in almost a way that at least at first I wouldn't necessarily be able to understand all of how it was impacting me, but just kind of having a front row seat to what God can do through someone that I know as a family member is a very ordinary person, but just someone that was dedicated to a God that could transcend sort of his own ordinary nature. And I think I'm obviously not trying to measure up against my grandfather by any means, but just that challenge of, hey, God can do the same thing with any one of us. We don't need to be equipped or super talented, or all we got to do is be faithful. So I think this kind of growing up with that and just that constant reminder definitely has shaped sort of the way I've kind of tried to follow after God as well.
Oh, that, I just can't imagine. I can't imagine it. And like you're saying, it's just normal. It's just routine. It's what you know. How has all of that then collided, if you will, you like my pun there, collided into this new world that you have, this new ministry, reaching, talking to, engaging the next gen through The Collision? Walk us through how that came to be and where you find yourself right now in this effort.
Well, one of the neat things that I think, especially now, some people don't realize is that like my grandfather's book, Experiencing God, kind of the inspiration for that was college students. That was my grandfather had a ministry to young adults, and just all the questions that were coming up for, how do we know what God's saying? How do we, what do I do with my life? I don't really know the direction. And so a lot of the framework, obviously it speaks to all generations, but sort of at the core of that was seeking to help kind of guide young adults to answer the difficult questions that were happening out in their world, and kind of where do we fit in with this sort of crazy world out there. So in some ways, I've sort of feel like God kind of, and it's been a windy path, but kind of calling to do the same thing. That there's, God hasn't changed, but the world's changed. The circumstances have changed. The values, the things that maybe were taken this accepted at face value a couple of generations ago now are called into question, or there's a different stigma, or the questions that young people are asking, I think, are different, and maybe the path to lead them kind of to the truth might need to take a different route. So kind of that's what the collision has tried to do, is say, what are the questions asking? What are the kind of the difficult issues in culture? Let's sort of observe what's going on, and then how can we kind of guide and equip people, not necessarily just to give them a bunch of answers, but equip them to be able to think through this and kind of see where God is at work, even in the craziness that's going on in our culture.
Mm. Okay, so I'm thinking that a lot of ministry leaders out there listening right now are thinking, what are those questions? And how do I keep up with what the latest questions are? Is that some of what you do on the collision as far as keeping through? I know you do book reviews. I know you do the podcast. I know you have the different pieces that we talked about there at the top. But how do you stay connected and relevant and know those questions? And then how would you suggest ministry leaders stay up to date?
Yeah, well, I think some of it is just observing. I think the kind of the foundational verse that we've always used for the collision is Acts 17, where you have the Apostle Paul kind of entering Athens, and essentially the Hollywood of the day, the kind of the cultural arts and culture center where the theater was, and the poetry was, and the philosophers were, and really that's sort of like the idea center of the ancient world. And you kind of get a fascinating narrative of Paul, a Christian called into that culture. How do they relate to it? How do they understand it? And kind of you might expect for him to sort of go in guns blazing. He has all the answers. He's gonna clean up that town and hit them with the truth. And you kind of see he takes a very opposite approach, where it talks about him just observing the sculptures to the gods and the unknown God, and he starts kind of quoting Greek poetry. He quotes two different poems in that passage, which were both hymns written to Zeus, very not biblical teaching, but just connecting the dots of hey, your poet said this, but I'm saying this, or your sculptures, your art, your entertainment, you're sort of partway there. You have this unknown God. Let me kind of let you know the rest of the story. But you just sort of see he demonstrates this a posture of just listening. He doesn't go in just, I have the answers. They need the truth. I'm going to give it to them. But you get a sense that he actually takes his time to observe, to see what's going on. And that's kind of what I've been doing with the collision with, hey, what are the popular movies right now? What are, beyond just maybe the content, is it, does it have swearing or violence? Although we talk about that too, but what are the worldview? What are the questions? What are the issues that are being kind of wrestled with? Is it identity? Is it kind of a stigma, hurt from authority? Is it dealing with broken families, or kind of what are the things that the stories that are being told? And some of that's just directly asking young adults, say, what are your struggles? What about this? We're kind of starting first with ask questions, find out, so that when you do give an answer, or at least guidance, you're answering the questions that they're asking, and not just sort of the ones that you have the answer ready and you want to give them. So I think, at least for me, that's sort of been the go back to for my approach.
I've heard that mentioned a lot lately, that a lot of times we are answering questions that young adults are not asking. And what's the tension there? How do we get trapped in that, where we want to share all of this information or guidance, or we want to help, we want to mentor, or we want to, just be there, but it's not the questions they're asking. How do we get in that place, and how do we get out of it?
Yeah, and I think the thing with that too is that you know, 99% of the time it's well, and it's not that there's wrong motivations, or, you know, we just have a bad, we just want to hit them over the head with the truth. I think it comes from a place of, hey, we love these people, we love this generation. You know, we see the pain and the struggles, and, you know, with technology, there's some of the struggles that, even, you know, as one of the kind of younger generations, that I didn't have to go through in high school. And just you know, there's so much out there kind of going against them, that I think we almost kind of skip the step of, we want to give them we think this will help them, this will set them free. But I think, you know, a lot of the I guess the guesswork can be overcome just by asking, by getting to know them, by listening to them talk, and then just being observing, you know, what they're actually saying, and doing research. But I think just asking lots of questions. One of the kind of the phrases we've used with the collision is just trying to spark cultural conversations of just sort of what's being said. You know, and part of a conversation is talking, but a big part is listening, asking good questions, and being attentive to that. And I do think, you know, that maybe doesn't solve all the problems for that. And you still do your research. Still, sometimes you got to speak truth even when people don't want to hear it. There's all of that. But I do think sort of that is a step that is often missing, because of our good intentions. We just want to get right into the meat of it, but just ask questions and then just sort of step back and listen.
So there'd be a little bit of discipline needed to not want to jump in and solve everything right away. Being able to listen and hear their questions, what they see as challenges, what they're thinking about, without slowing down to let them talk through it and process and wait. I can see where some discipline would have to be in place there.
Yeah, and I think one of kind of, I think, the misconceptions with kind of the younger generations, whether that's millennials down to uh, Gen Z, is that they're sort of anti-social, or, you know, technology has isolated them, and they don't do the same kind of gatherings. And I think when you kind of, you know, get to know these generations, what you find is almost the opposite. That, you know, they still gather, they still get together because of technology. They're, you know, every activity now is become social. When they play video games, you know, when I grew up as a young kid, I would just play on my own TV. Now it's, you know, they're talking to each other. Even music, like different streaming platforms, you can do live comments, and that almost like technology has filled in the gaps. You know, where back in the day, maybe, you know, you wouldn't be able to see someone, or connect with people. So I think that because of technology, maybe some misunderstandings. I think we assume that they're not relational, that they just sort of, you know, we need to just preach to them, or but they're very relational. They're very, you know, they want to, especially with older generations, they want people to listen to their story and get to know them. So I think they're ready. It's just sort of us taking the initiative to foster those relationships, and kind of be patient with it.
Do you think we maybe don't give them enough credit? Like, are they stronger than we give them credit for? Can they handle more than we give them credit for? Are we not challenging them enough or giving them enough responsibility in an attempt to protect? Maybe I'm not sure what my
Yeah, and
question is
that's
there, but
no,
I
yeah,
think
I
about
know.
that.
Yeah, I think kind of one of my whenever I hear someone that is just sort of harping on the younger generations, and they just have all these complaints, and they're too emotional, and they're lazy, or they're just not grounded in the truth. And usually that's a sign that of someone that doesn't spend a whole lot of time around the younger generations. I think kind of the more you're around them, obviously there are issues, there are flaws. Everyone has, sure, every generation has had things to overcome. But even a lot of the things that we almost see as their weaknesses are also just, I think, their strengths. I think if you look at the statistics, kind of the younger generations like Gen Z, more involved in like humanitarian or activism, or just sort of helping in the communities than any generation before. There is this passion to serve and to relate, and you know, just to make a difference. You know, to not very much, especially I think started with millennials and even down, especially with Gen Z, just
Yeah.
not driven by finances as much, not driven by sort of you know, monetary success as much as, you know, I want my life to matter. I want to change people and change the world. And I think all those are good things. Those aren't they can be abused and become a negative, but, you know, at their core, those are valuable assets for the church. that we need. And I do think some of that sometimes there is a tendency to treat them, kind of keep giving them baby food when they want a little bit more, and they want to serve, they want to get out in the world and make a difference, and we kind of want to just sort of entertain them in our church until they're ready to, until they're older to make a difference. And I think one of the trends you see is a lot of young people finding other avenues to fill those passions in the world, and to make a difference and do activism, because the church sort of told them, not yet, one day, but not quite yet. So I think, at least in my experience with the kind of younger generations, that they can handle a lot more, I think, than we give them credit for.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I had an 18-year-old tell me recently that she was really basically bored with her the classes, Bible studies, and the groups that were meeting for her age group, because it was so childish still. It was so much entertaining, like you're talking about, and just trying to always be some kind of fun activity. And she was really, really thirsty and hungry for some depth. And so and I thought that was an interesting statement for her to actually articulate all of that. And so it got me thinking in that area as well.
And I
All right.
think, oh,
Oh, go
no,
ahead.
sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think even like a recent Lifeway poll that kind of surveyed people, that young adults that leave the church, kind of what they found, like the core of that was those that were most involved, actively doing stuff, but they were the ones that stuck around, and those that were the most sort of passive and weren't necessarily plugged into actually serving, more just sort of equipping for a future day, are the majority of those that sort of ended up walking away or finding kind of other avenues for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And we all want to be valued and make a difference and feel like we're contributing. And I think that maybe starts younger than we're given credit for. I've been talking about next gen, and we've been talking about millennials and Gen Z and all, but could you define all of that for us? What is that? What are we, when we're talking about next gen, what are we really, does that change as we all get older? Is the next gen always the
Yeah,
next?
it's kind of a tricky, or sort of a, in some ways it's helpful, in some ways maybe it's not as helpful as we think it is, because it's a relative term. I would sort of describe it as a sort of anyone that's sort of behind or coming after where you currently
Right.
are, because I'm sort of, part of my ministry is sort of investing in the next generation, the next gen. But like in our Blackaby ministries, I am the next gen.
Right.
There's the older generations they're investing in me, and so kind of who the next gen are changes. I know, kind of, like, I'm a millennial, and sort of millennials have been sort of almost become shorthand for kind of the next generation,
Right.
the young kids, which
Well,
is,
it's the coolest name for you. I
yeah,
mean,
it is.
I mean,
It is.
I mean,
Um,
I'm Gen X, and so
okay.
a lot of times when Gen Z is mentioned, people will accidentally say Gen X, or you hear it and you're like, wait, are you talking about which one? And you guys are right in the middle of us. So
Yeah, I feel like we're more unique. We have millennials, is a, who, but it's funny because we sort of, it's become shorthand for like the young generation, but sort of based on like most of the breakdowns, like they're millennials now in their 40s. Within, if it hasn't already happened, the oldest ones will start becoming grandparents if they had families
Oh
early.
my
Like,
goodness.
so it's sort of the sense that, like, we sort of get comfortable with, the next gen is this people, this group, and I think some of those, the generational stuff, I'm fascinated by that, and the uniqueness of like Gen Z compared to the millennials, and how they're really not the same, even though they get lumped together. I think there's value in that. But kind of on a bigger picture, I think sometimes we can get too into that and just sort of, we're focused on this, and all millennials and all Gen Z think this way. And uh, for me, I've just always seen next gen as a sort of who's coming after, sort of who's sort of rising up after me. And in some ways, you're looking back, but you're also sort of looking forward to, like with our collision, like, where is culture heading? What are if you look at sort of the younger generations and sort of what their passions are, what's developing, what is the world that they're going to enter into? I'm a parent, so I'm thinking ahead, what are my kids going to enter into, and kind of how do we equip them, not just to navigate now, although that is part of it, but how do we sort of equip them for what's ahead. um, so I don't know, I think that the next gen can, as a technical term. I don't know exactly how to define it, but just for me, it's just sort of this posture of, hey, just who's coming after you, whoever that might be. There's always someone coming after you, and sort of how do you invest in them?
That makes sense. I see like the Baptist campus ministries are an incredible force all over our college campuses. University ministers, pastors on church staffs, college pastors, they're just all out there working and constantly keeping up. And I think about that. I think, how do they target one group and they figure them out? They learn their language and they start to communicate, and then boom, this next group comes through, and then they have to start over. It just seems so exhausting in some ways, that constantly be having to relearn and develop, and just to stay up on these things. So I'm glad there's people like you that are researching and staying connected.
Yeah, and maybe too, I'd add to it. I think one of maybe the negative consequences of thinking in the next gen term almost kind of goes back to what we were saying as far as sort of the forward thinking, that they are sort of coming in after us. There's always a generation, but they're also the current gen for their own life. I think some of that can foster into the mindset that they're sort of like the rookies that we got to train up, and but they are currently living out their the life God's called, and there's challenges. They're not waiting. So in some sense, they're the next gen to us. But Gen Z is the current Gen C. They have their own challenges that God doesn't wait until they become older. So maybe just some of that framework, I think, we got to kind of keep in mind or push back against.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Good thoughts. Okay, so if someone is interested in launching a major ministry or an effort to the younger generations going into 2023, or maybe they want to polish what they're already doing, give us some tips for just some quick practical things we can do right out of the gate. I know we've talked about a few, but if you want to summarize them, just thinking ahead as they go into this new year, what are some tips you would suggest?
Yeah, well, maybe a couple of things. Again, I don't pretend like I've cracked the code, to figure all these things out. We're, especially with the collision, we've learned just sort of trying to figure things out as we go and trying things. And but I think one of the things that we sort of learned along the way with sort of how do we develop a ministry that reaches out is almost to focus more on the issues or the topics or the questions, rather than just the delivery method or the lingo or the sort of talk about the things that they're talking about. Don't necessarily stress that you're sounding just like them, or you're trying to add lingo, or you're trying to kind of win them over by I think a lot of the stuff aimed towards kind of the younger generations just comes off as older people trying to sound like younger people.
They can see through it. They can see through that.
Yeah,
we look pretty goofy sometimes.
Yeah, they're they know when it's authentic or not. So I think that's part of it, is just sort of obviously make it accessible to them, whether that's through podcasts or videos or YouTubes, or put it in, through the channels that they're familiar with and that they're going to, but focus kind of on what they want to talk about, and kind of guide them for that. And maybe the other one is just kind of like I mentioned, I guess, is sort of focus also on just sort of equipping them for now. Don't just sort of present a bunch of stuff as though it's future thinking, but provide resources and insights or just guidance for them that actually equips them to do something now, and not just sort of always pointing them kind of towards the future, or when you're older, God might call you to do this, but God's already called them to do stuff, so sort of aim towards that.
All right, I like it. Well, Daniel, thank you. I will put information in the show notes about the collision and a little bit more about you and just how people can be involved. But thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, thank you for having me.